Let's get started with a little backstory. As you probably know, Final Fantasy is one of the only MMOs available for PC and soon to be every console. Genuinely impressive that they're managing to bring it even to Switch. But with that, of course, brings a unique complication that most of its competitors wouldn't have to deal with. The game had to be developed for controller users to play it too. They have made some improvements to it over the years, but even back in the days of Realm Reborn, it was more than functional, and I'm here to show you that a controller is not a limiting factor. You just have to know how to set it up. I first started playing this game all the way back in patch 2.2. I'm so old. Originally, I played on keyboard mouse, made it to around level 40, and on a whim decided to give controller a try. I never looked back. Maybe not everybody will agree, but the controller provides a comfortable and easily accessible control scheme that is unmatched by keyboard, which greatly outweighs the small handful of weaknesses that it does have. Once you get used to it, using the triggers with your D-pad and face buttons will feel like second nature, and I'm going to show you how to set things up so that you don't have to cycle through your bars with the right bumper. Now, let's get started. You should be able to find all these settings in your character configuration window until I say otherwise, but just follow along and you won't get lost. And for the sake of eliminating confusion, any reference to button prompts will be using PlayStation layout, so there's no questioning which ABXY buttons I'm talking about. I assume that controller mode should be on by default, but if not, and for PC players, make sure this is toggled to controller mode if you want to use a controller. Otherwise, a lot of things are going to act really funky. Besides that, the very first thing you have to set up, and I would go so far as to argue this is mandatory, turn on legacy type movement. Feel free to disagree with me, of course, but this one is a must-have for me. This gives you the full 360-degree movement you'd be used to from other games instead of the awkward and stiff movement from standard type movement. I think this is much more debated by keyboard players, but for controllers, I highly recommend legacy movement. The next thing, and this one comes down purely to preference, is to set your camera angle to what you prefer. Unfortunately, if you're controller only, I think you can only change this here in the settings, but for PC players you can hold control plus the arrow keys to adjust it. My preference is to put it really high at 97 for two reasons. First, it gives you a better viewing angle on tall enemies. I first ran into that issue back in the Stormblood 24-man raids, but there are many fights where having a higher viewing angle is greatly beneficial. The second reason, see this line here, between your crossbars? I use that to keep track of my character even in busy environments. Your UI will always appear over all other game elements, so this line gives you a relative position for yourself if you don't change your default bar placement. Now move on over to the Target tab and turn on auto-targeting. Feel free to experiment with which type you prefer, but I like closest range and cone. I only recently turned this one on myself because I, forgot, but you can have ground AoE abilities such as Sacred Soil execute by double tapping the ability, rather than having to press X to confirm its placement. While you're learning what your buttons are, I recommend having Hotbar help turned on, but once you memorize what your buttons do, turn it off to reduce visual clutter. Next up, always display WXHB. That stands for double hotbar. I see some people play without this, and for the life of me, I genuinely do not understand it. Now, once Evercold comes around, this won't be as important as it is now, with the way they're reducing and combining buttons, but it'll still be fairly useful even then. On its own, this setting does nothing until you configure it. At most, you could use it to display some extra cooldown timers, so let's configure it. First, go over to sharing and check which crossbars you have shared. I believe by default it's set to all but 1, 2, and 3. This should be enough, but change this as you wish. This means that the ones unchecked are not shared and will switch anytime you change your classes. Things you want to be consistent across every class, such as sprinting, mounting, limit break, or emotes, put those abilities on the shared hotbars, not hotbars 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to proceed assuming that bars 1 through 3 aren't shared and the rest are. And if you want to use a trick I use for displaying cooldown timers, also uncheck hotbar 10. I'll go over that later. Now go over to custom and enable both these settings. By default, this is set to show you crossbar 8. You'll want to change this to crossbar 2 and this one above it to crossbar 3. This makes it so that anything you put on your second and third crossbar is easily accessible. And the reason we do it this way and not the other way around is so that anything on your second crossbar is placed up above for easy access. I use bar 3 for utility and auxiliary things, such as potions, macros, and summoning. I'll explain how I organize my abilities for these crossbars later in the video, So as you can see, when I double tap, I have access to the top row, and if I hold both, it changes to my third hotbar. Lastly, here's one a lot of people don't know about. Open up your system configuration and go down to controller settings. While we're here, I believe auto run is enabled by default, but if not, that's up to you if you want it. Now go to button configuration and see here. Your stick clicks can be set to custom actions, including 2 macros. These will be macros 98 and 99. I use these for limit break and sprint, but you can assign them to whatever you want. I get a lot of use out of sprinting with the stick. In case you don't know how to set up macros, you can do those here. And type in /action followed by the name of the button you want to use. If that button is more than one word, put it in quotes or the system won't recognize it. For those of you who have gotten used to using your sticks to draw or sheath your weapon, or to dismount, you can still do that by pressing both the bumpers at once. If you're used to going into first person with the left stick, sorry, I don't have an answer for that one. Now before we move on to button philosophy, while we're still in the settings, a couple of tips not related to controller usage, but I highly recommend. Turn off items going directly to your armor chest. This puts them in your inventory, which primarily makes it easy to remove items that you don't want to keep. I recommend displaying the target's remaining HP percentage. You can also choose to hide the MSQ tracker when all quests are complete for a cleaner UI. Same thing for hiding the duty list during instance duties. Next, check out your name display settings and set them up however you like it. I recommend turning off battle effects for party and non-party members. This doesn't really matter for dungeons, but especially in high-end content and 24-man raids, this can help reduce the visual noise so you can focus better on what's happening. Now that we're out of the settings, if you've never used a controller before and you're considering giving it a try, let me quickly go over how the controls work. For simplicity, I'll be referring to the 2 halves and button layouts as right and left side, and D-pad and face buttons. And if I refer to something being on my bottom or top bar, I'm referring to bars 1 and 2 respectively. Your crossbars are separated into 2 halves, and those halves are separated into the face buttons and the D-pad. To use the buttons on the left side, hold the left trigger, and hold the right trigger for the right half. To activate the buttons, you use the trigger combined with your face buttons or D-pad. And to use the top bar, since we set it up earlier, you can double tap the triggers to use those. And lastly, to use your third bar that we set up, you hold both triggers. You can cycle through your bars with the right bumper or hold the right bumper with the face button or D-pad to select a specific bar, but for battle content you shouldn't need to do things that way because of how we've set things up. Disclaimer: unless you're a freak like me, do not just copy my button layout. There's something wrong with my brain, and the best way for me to lay out my abilities is from left to right. This means the buttons for my main combo are pressed by my left thumb, meaning I technically can't move while using them unless I stretch my other thumb over to my D-pad. Yes, I do that. If you have a normal brain, you'll probably put your main combo on the right side face buttons. However, what you may still get use out of is my organization philosophy. This is not a hard rule. I even break it myself in some instances, and some abilities just get put where there's open space. Ultimately, whatever feels natural for you is where you should put your abilities. With that said, let me explain how I group things. First, I do not think of my abilities in regards to all 32 slots, or even 16 or 8. I consider them in these clusters of 4. To use Dancer as an example, this cluster is my single target, and this cluster is my multi-target. For most classes, my 1, 2, and 3 combo is organized like this, with any alternative combo buttons, like on Dancer or Warrior, on the bottom. But you do whatever feels comfortable for you. For now, I highly recommend clustering your combos together. It keeps things very easy to keep track of, but this won't matter in Evercold since our combos are being combined into one button. For DPS and tanks, my bottom bar is mostly used for buttons that deal damage directly, and my top bar is used for buffs and utility. Quick tip for tanks specifically: put buttons that serve the same function, like your 30% mit and invuln, and roll actions such as provoke in the same slot on all 4 tanks. This way, if you're switching between them, your abilities are consistent across classes. Same thing goes for healers, at least for, roll actions and hit and raise. For healers, I do the opposite. My healing buttons are all on the bottom, and my DPS and utility buttons are all on the top. You may want to put your dot and main DPS buttons on the bottom somewhere so they're more accessible. Feel free, this is just how I do mine. The main point of all of this is to say, put some thought into where you put your buttons. Don't just let the game assign them for you, because they're going to be all over the place if you do. In order to figure out where to put your buttons for yourself, like I will continue to say, read your tooltips. I mean, how could you expect to improve as a player if you don't know what your buttons do? You can also always just go to a striking dummy and see what happens. As I mentioned in my healer video, if you're overwhelmed by the amount of buttons you have, take everything off your bars and go run Palace of the Dead and the other deep dungeons. This will give you your abilities one by one so you can figure out where you want to put them. Besides healers, most classes won't get a mention here, so I'm going to explain some job-specific tips for your layout. Healing is probably the hardest role for controller, but it's not prohibitively difficult in any way. So here's a handful of tips to make your experience easier. Up and down on the D-pad scrolls through the party, of course, but if you go up from the start, you can start from the bottom of the party list. This can make it easier to reach party members at the bottom in full parties. As well, you can start scrolling through your party list while you're still casting. If you hover over a party member without actually selecting them, your air quotes cursor will jump back to your previous target. You can use this to throw a single heal at a party member without having to change targets and fight with the controls. Likewise, you can hard select a party member so it won't jump back to your previous target. I already mentioned auto-targeting earlier. The reason you do this is so that you can target a party member for healing, and then deselect them and start casting DPS spells to automatically target the boss without having to select them. Macros are your friend. You can use them to target specific party slots for things like Astro cards. For White Mage, Scholar, and Sage's basic AoE, your AoE spells are all untargeted. So during trash pulls, you can just leave the tank as your target and spam your AoE. Just as I mentioned for tanks, it helps to have abilities that serve the same or similar function in the same spot across jobs. For example, my Medica 2 and Aspected Helios are on the same slots on White Mage and Astro. Or, my Adlo, a single target shield from Scholar, is in the same spot as Haima for Sage. While they're not exactly the same in this case, they do serve a similar function. Now to start with Scholar. As I've been saying, keep certain abilities together. In this case, I keep my fairy abilities together in the same cluster. I also put all my Aetherflow spenders in the same cluster. And if you want to say, Jin, XCOG spends Aetherflow and Emergency Tactics doesn't. Yes, shut up, I know. I put things like this before XCOG existed and I've been used to it for over 10 years. I told you, these aren't hard rules, just general guidance. For Sage, if you do put your DPS on top like I do, put a second Eucrasia up top as well so you don't have to swap bars to empower it. For White Mage, I put my single target in one cluster, my AoE in its own cluster, my off level in another cluster, and kinda just what's left in this last cluster. For Astro, all of your card buttons should probably be in the same cluster. Like White Mage, I keep my single target, AoE, and leftover OG cities in the same cluster. Now for Dancer, put your single target and AoE rotations in the same order on your bars. This way, regardless of which side you're using, the dance buttons are always in the same relative spot. For Ninja, this should be an obvious one. Group your Mudra abilities together. For Summoner, Summoner is a pretty easy class to keep track of, but it can help to put all of your summon abilities in one cluster. As for my Carbuncle, since that isn't used during combat, I have it on my third bar. Pictomancer, put your motifs and muses in the same relative positions in their clusters. For Bard, however you orient your abilities, put your songs in the order you intend to use them for your rotation. This doesn't of course help with execution, but it can be a good reminder and help you keep track of the timers. Like I said, hotbars are extremely preferential, so if none of this works for you, just ignore it and do what does work. And don't be afraid to be wrong. If you find yourself reaching for an ability and that's not where you put it, just move it. Trust your instinct. And again, read your tooltips. As I said earlier, controller does have a few weaknesses. Scrolling through the party list isn't as easy as using a mouse, but with practice and macros, this is a minor inconvenience at worst. Also, you're a bit more limited using the crossbars than a player with hotbars may be, since they can configure theirs to be whatever keyboard buttons they like. But as I've shown, we're in no short supply of slots, being able to effectively have 48 slots for each job and whatever 2 macros you want in your sticks for convenience. Eventually, using the triggers and your buttons will become second nature, I promise. The one thing controller doesn't really have a great answer for is placing ground AoEs like Sacred Soil and the other healer bubbles. My recommendation is to set up the targeting for this out of combat, probably to the center of your screen, Have the double tap enabled and use your camera to position it during combat. Moving the targeting circle during combat is clunky and not recommended outside of minor adjustments. With a little work, you can overcome these weaknesses. I've cleared savage tiers on every roll using only a controller. I know you can too. And the last thing. Remember how I said to have Hotbar 10 unshared? Go over to your HUD layout, select Hotbar 10, and edit the UI element. Make it whatever size and shape you like. This can be used to display abilities with cooldowns that you want to keep track of easily. Putting things in this bar might be a little difficult for controller-only players, but I'm positive there's a way to do it. Maybe you can just find a mouse to plug in temporarily. For PC players, if you're having a hard time getting used to your buttons, maybe give controller a try. Maybe you'll be like me and become a lifelong user. And that's everything I can think of. As always, like this video if you found it helpful, share it with others, subscribe for more, and leave a comment if you have your own advice for controller players. You can catch me here on YouTube for my live streams a couple times a week, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.